If you're searching for a sharp, dynamic new gambit to add to your arsenal, you're in the right place. Stick around, because by the end of this lesson, you'll be ready to unleash a powerful new weapon to dominate your opponents. Let's dive straight in. 1 here, we begin with the moves pawn to e4 and pawn to e5, entering a very standard and common structure of the king's pawn opening. And now comes the first surprise. We play pawn to d4. This position is known as the center game, and the name makes perfect sense. You can see all 3 central pawns occupying the middle of the board. Most players will simply capture the pawn on d4, and if they don't take it, that's usually not good for them, because you can capture their central pawn and leave them without a pawn in the center. But when they do take on d4, the move we want to play is pawn to f4. This isn't the most common choice in this position. In the center game, many players prefer developing moves such as knight to f3 or bishop to c4. After you play pawn to f4, black will often respond with knight to c6, trying to defend the pawn they've just gained. They are up a padoon, so of course they want to hold on to it. It makes perfect sense. Do I? Now we want to increase the pressure on that pawn by developing our knight. Black will usually defend it with their bishop, and at this point it becomes clear that we are not going to win that pawn back immediately. They have both a bishop and a knight protecting it, and we have no effective or forcing way to attack it again. So instead of fixating on that pawn, we will simply continue our development by playing bishop to d3. There is a specific reason for placing the bishop on d3, but that will become important in a few moves. Typically, black will just keep developing naturally. Let's give them a common move, such as knight to f6, a very normal developing choice that you will see in most games from this position. What we want to do now is castle kingside, and in the large majority of games, black will castle as well. Believe it or not, that is where black goes wrong. Once black castles, they are already walking into trouble, because now we play pawn to e5, and this is exactly why we placed our bishop on d3 earlier. From d3, the bishop is perfectly positioned to target the square h7 once the center opens. What happens in most games is that black responds by placing their knight in the center of the board, and this allows us to execute a classic tactical idea known as the Greek gift sacrifice. We play bishop captures h7, giving check. Black has no good alternatives here. Whether they capture the bishop or move the king to g8, our follow-up is the same. They usually take the bishop, and then we continue with knight to g5, giving another strong check. 3. At this point, black has very few good options. They can either move the king or capture the knight. If they take your knight with the queen, you simply recapture with the pawn and win material, an excellent outcome for you. If they move the king, only king to g8 avoids immediate checkmate, but many players make the worst mistake and run to g6. In that case, you play pawn to f5, giving check. Your bishop protects the knight, so the king is forced to h6, where queen to g4 follows, threatening queen to h4 checkmate. Black is essentially helpless. If instead the king goes directly to h6, you simply bring the queen to d3, immediately threatening queen to h7 mate. Most players will then capture your knight as a last resort, but if they give up their queen for a knight, the game is already completely won for you. If black tries pawn to g6 to block your queen, you simply swing the queen to h3, give check, and after the king moves, queen to h7 is checkmate. If we give black the best defense, king to g8, the key idea in the Greek gift continues. You play queen to h5, threatening mate in 1. Their best move, surprisingly, is to sacrifice the queen by capturing your knight. If they do, you gladly take the queen and win the game with a huge material advantage. But most players won't give up their queen. Instead, they usually try rook to e8, hoping to let the king escape. In that case, playing queen to h7 no longer leads to a forced mate. However, here's the important detail to remember. Since the rook moved, you don't go to h7. Instead, you capture on f7 with check, and that forces the king into h8, keeping the attack alive. 5. From here, you bring your queen back to h5, forcing the king to retreat to g8. Then you play queen to h7, driving the king to f8, and after that queen to h8 forces the king to e7. Now comes the key point. When you finally play queen to g7, there is no pawn on f7 to block the check, so this time it's checkmate. In just about 15 moves, the game is over, thanks to this little-known gambit in the center game. Let's rewind to an earlier position. After knight to c6, the most common move, you play knight to f3. But not everyone will follow the main line. Some players like to get tricky and play bishop to b4, giving check. Here you must be careful, but the solution is simple. Play pawn to c3 to block the check. Black will almost always capture the pawn, which actually helps you. It opens the way to develop your knight. Most players will even trade their bishop for that knight, mainly because if they don't, that knight will later jump into the center after you castle, becoming a very strong piece. 6. They usually take your knight while they still can, so you recapture. The doubled pawn isn't ideal, but it won't cause you any trouble. Black can't easily attack it. In this position, most players play pawn to d6 to stop you from pushing e5. If instead they play knight to f6, you can immediately continue with pawn to e5 and bishop to d3, reaching the same attacking setup as before. But assuming they do play pawn to d6, that's fine. You simply continue with bishop to d3, they play knight to f6, and you castle. Now, if black also castles, the position should already look familiar. You get to play pawn to e5 again. If they capture, you recapture, and after knight to d5, the exact same Greek gift idea appears. You sacrifice on h7, give check, jump your knight to g5, and black once again must either give up the queen or run the king into a hopeless position. The finish will be just as brutal as in the main line. So let's step back. Castling on move 9 is actually a big mistake for black. A better defensive try is bishop to g4. This is trickier because your knight is pinned, but there is a simple solution. You still play pawn to e5. You'll notice the same recurring themes and patterns in this gambit, which makes it very easy to learn and very dangerous for black. 7. Your bishop is already on d3, so pushing pawn to e5 works the same way here. Black will usually capture, you recapture, and then they have two common replies. Either they move their knight to the center or they get greedy and take your pawn. If they move the knight to the center, you simply play bishop to c4, hitting the knight twice. Most players will make the natural move and retreat the knight, often to b6. And now you have a powerful tactic. You play bishop captures f7, giving check. If they don't take, you've won a free pawn. If they do take, you follow with knight to g5, a discovered check from the rook that also creates a double check. Since double checks force the king to move, black has no good square. Even if they fall back to e8, you simply capture the bishop and reach a winning position. If they go to g8, it's even worse for them. 8. If black plays king to g8, you have another powerful tactic. This one is much harder to spot, but extremely strong. You play rook to f8, giving check. If black captures with the queen, you respond with queen to b3, and there is no escape. Black can try blocking a few times, but you will simply take everything and deliver checkmate. If instead they capture with the king, your idea is queen to f1, giving another check. Black is now in a terrible position. Their best move is to play queen to f6, sacrificing the queen. If they try moving the king instead, queen to f7 is immediate mate. Either way, you're winning the game very quickly. 9. Great tactic there. Now let's rewind a few moves. That sequence works when black plays knight to d5, allowing you to set up the bishop to c4 tactic. But many players will instead get greedy and capture the pawn. This is where you use what's called a counter pin. Black is attacking your pinned piece, so you pin their knight to the king. Once you do that, they have very few good options. If they try to defend the knight, you can simply capture it. You already have two attackers on it. And of course, moving the knight is illegal, so they have nothing better there. In practice, black's best attempt is queen takes bishop, trying to get something in return. This is actually their only chance, because if you respond with queen takes pawn on e5, they're fine. After they block the check, your attack vanishes. But if you instead play knight takes knight, hitting both the queen and the bishop, you are completely winning. After black moves their queen to safety, you simply capture the bishop. Even if black plays queen to e4, the queen still cannot take your knight, and their knight cannot capture without losing their queen. If black trades queens, you recapture with check and continue the sequence. You end up a bishop, and although black has a couple of extra pawns, including a doubled pawn, having an extra piece gives you a comfortable and clearly better position.